Hello everybody, today we discuss going to the grocery store and talking about common foods that will help you achieve a high protein diet. Fitness marketing is convincing millions of individuals that pseudoscience and quick fix products have all the answers. We are here to combat that with the latest science and research, along with our unique style of communication and entertainment. My name is Fran Ramsden, and this is the HealthForce podcast. Hey everybody, yep, how's that new intro working out? We want to do something a little special there, make it a little more personable to our brand and who we are. Pretty pleased with how it turned out. Well, let's hop right into the good stuff. RamsandLeeFitness.com, RamsandEliteFitness.com is the website. I want to, before, again, setting this context for today, we got to quickly touch on high protein diets. We've got to get into it quickly so you can understand the importance of it. And then we will discuss what our household does, some common food items that we make sure to pick up that allow us to live this certain lifestyle. So high protein diet, there's a couple resources that I want you guys to go check out that we have, and we'll quickly hit these up. And again, I'm not really hawking any of these. They're materials of our company, Ramsden Fitness, that have already been out. And I think that they're just good basics to hit up before, if you're still somebody that's not understanding the max benefits of a high protein diet or still confused about it, this is where you should begin. So first off, you can actually listen to the HealthForce podcast, episode number 2. Number 2, the second episode that we ever did was on an intro to high protein diets. And that's how much of the importance that I view an adequate nutrition plan and how big of a role it plays in your life, okay? So in that podcast, again, you can find that on the website, RamsandLeeFitness.com. You can find that on iTunes. You can find that on practically any place where you can play a podcast, SoundCloud included, et cetera, et cetera. The description of it reads as follows. We go through some audio from a vegan endurance athlete who also appears to be a bit nutty, by the way. We briefly introduce the terms fanatics and what it means, and then we wrap up with some science to make the case for a high-protein diet as being the most optimal for fat loss and for lean tissue increase. So that's going to be a nice overall encompassing basics. HealthForce episode number 2. There's an article we have, RamsandLeeFitness.com. It's entitled 3 Steps to a High-Protein Diet. This was made May 18th, 2016. I'm going to go ahead and read this for you. As previously discussed in podcast episodes number 2 and number 3, a high-protein diet is optimal for the majority of the population. In this article, we outline 3 steps to the high-protein diet. As a general guideline, we recommend a diet close to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, consumed daily. So for an example, if you weigh 150 pounds, you should be shooting for about 150 grams of protein a day. This is not set in stone, it's not an ironclad rule, but it generally will set up the average individual with a proper macronutrient split. Step 1 to creating this diet is the frequency of meals. With having a higher protein intake goal, it may seem like an impossible task at first. Most U.S. citizens consume under or close to probably 100 grams of protein a day, if I had to take a guess. This is woefully low for the majority of individuals and may make the increase of lean tissue, which is muscle, and the decrease of fat more unlikely. It still comes down to calories in and calories out, but macronutrient manipulation may still have influence as to the gradient of success. In order to help consume more protein daily, we recommend consuming a meal every 3 or 4 hours or so. These meals do not have to be full-on, traditional thought-of meals, as in the classical sense. Like having a salad, then a soup, then an appetizer, then the main course, and dessert. Okay? A meal in the context that we speak of is simply a time to eat food. If you consume calories every 3 hours or so, you give yourself a better shot at consuming higher protein amounts as compared to an individual who's only eating 2 or 3 times per day. So I'm going to interject here a little bit. It's not some magic that if you have 5 or 6 meals a day that you're, stoking your metabolism, that you are creating some sort of environment where the body is consistently given all this food everywhere and it just burns fat. It's nothing magical. It's really not. It's just that when you look at a traditional diet of having breakfast, lunch, and dinner, If that's what you're relying on, well, in order to get 150 grams of protein a day, each meal is 50 grams. That is a lot of protein at one meal for the most part. So you're better off breaking up and having 20 or 30 grams a couple of times throughout the day. All right. Step 2, protein at every single meal. Once we begin to consume more meals per day, now we can begin to start making smart choices as to what foods we consume. Selecting protein-rich foods such as meat or dairy will ensure that we receive adequate amounts of protein at every meal. Great sources include eggs, cottage cheese, some dairy, etc., etc. If you strive to include one item from above in every meal, you're going to be on the path to consuming a high-protein diet. Depending upon your daily protein intake goal, consuming between 25 grams and 35 grams at every meal is a pretty good benchmark. Step 3, limit fats and carbohydrates. No, not as in cut out all your carbs and fat. Limit fats and carbohydrates as in selecting a protein-rich food first and then adding a fat or carbohydrate food second. As an example, you select eggs for your first meal and decide to consume oatmeal, which is the carbohydrate source, as well. You first secure your protein source before consuming any other food choice. What can happen if you fail to do this is that your daily calorie goals will fast approach, but your daily protein goals will be lagging behind. This is either going to create failure to reach your protein goals, or you're going to have to consume only grilled chicken or protein shakes for the rest of your day at some point, and that's not fun. We recommend avoiding high fat, high carbohydrate sources almost entirely with no protein, right? I'll say it again, we recommend avoiding a high fat, high carbohydrate food source almost entirely. Foods that fit this bill are things like donuts, pizza, pepperoni rolls, fast food, etc. These foods are better left for either a cheat meal or a cheat day. In conclusion, be sure to follow our podcast and continue to get tips and information in order to successfully live a consistently healthy lifestyle. A high-protein diet is no longer controversial. If an individual has specific considerations and medical limitations concerning protein intake, we obviously recommend they follow their primary care physician's advice. Start consuming higher amounts of protein to start optimally shedding body fat and adding lean tissue. Last source that I would direct you to is actually on Kindle, Amazon Kindle. I have a book on there called The High Protein Diet, Unleash the Ability to Burn Fat and Build Muscle at Will. Again, I don't really care if you buy it. It's like $3.99 on Kindle. And I believe it's free if you have Kindle Unlimited. And it's a quick read, about 39 pages. But again, it goes into more detail about step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do this. It gives you some numbers and figures out exactly, for the most part, gives you a nice little ball range figure, but it gives you the exact process of kind of what you should do to go about forming a high protein diet. So with that in mind, I'm going to move forward, assuming that the majority of you in the audience listening see the value of a high protein diet and accept it. You accept that premise. Okay. Now let's talk about when you go to the grocery store, how we're going to maximize this trip in order to pick up some foods that are going to help encourage this diet and lifestyle. We tend to shop. I do the shopping, but where we live right now, there's a store called Aldi. I don't know how popular it is nationwide, but it's essentially honestly, when you look at it, it's like a discount store, but they have great options for food. They have an organic line. They do have some meat section, but essentially they're underpriced for the market where we live. And they do this by not providing a bunch of employees or customer service everywhere. It's a smaller store, it's confined, and they really cut their expenses and cut their costs on like payroll and things like that, and they're able to then lower the price of their goods and make smaller margins on everything, right? But their food choices have expanded. And when they first came out, it was interesting because I would do like my bulk shopping there because it was cheap, like my box and canned goods and stuff like that. And then we'd go to a different store for my higher end items, meat, dairy, things like that, right? Well, they've since improved, and now I just shop at Aldi for all my things. And I actually think that's the best bang for your buck in terms of nutritious food for the price. So with that in mind, we're going to quickly go through some things. Here's what I do for my protein sources. They have a section where you're able to buy what they call natural chicken breast or natural chicken tenderloins, right? Now, natural is not the same as organic. It's not the same as grass-fed, and it's not up to that level of standard, but it is better, arguably, than just regular processed chicken that doesn't have these things. Like these hens these chickens are fed vegetarian type diets. They might even be free roaming, something to that effect. But they do have nice all natural chicken, and it's super cost effective. I think we probably buy a pound at a time, and it's somewhere in the range of like $5-6 for a pound. Several chicken breasts, each chicken breast between 4 to 6 ounces. There might be 4 in a pack, and it's about $5. So somewhere in that range. But we do pick up chicken breast. And then the other thing that I throw into the same category is whitefish, tilapia, cod, any of those sort of fishes, and you can buy those frozen or fresh. Okay, you can buy them frozen or fresh. This makes up our lean protein meats. Chicken is low fat, low carb, high protein. Same thing goes for the whitefish. Tuna is also in this category. You can buy cans of tuna, same sort of deal, low fat, high protein. The higher end items that cost more money in the seafood department that fit this bill are going to be things like scallops, shrimp. Again, anything that's low fat, high protein is going to fit this first category of our protein selections. Turkey breast can fit this bill depending on the leanness of it, but I do tend to throw that in the second category. The second category is going to be meats that are going to be accompanied with some fat intake as well. So turkey breast, ground turkey breast, ground beef, and things like steak, different cuts of steak are going to fit this bill. Now, look, there's a million different ways to go. There's a million different cuts. I get it. I'm not going to go into the detail of every single cut of meat, but generally this is category number 2, where you're going to be looking at, on average, for ground turkey and ground beef, you can find them 93% lean, 7% fat. So anywhere in the ballpark of 4, 5, 6, 8 grams of fat per serving and like 20 to 25 grams of protein. Okay? It's a good choice to make on a diet like this. Steak, again, is a different cuts. A lot of places you're going to have, if they put the label on there, they should put on, when they give you the nutritional facts. Some cuts you will see will have more fat associated with it than protein. If you like those cuts that are more fatty, you could always just slice and trim the fat off. That's always an option. But I tend to just buy cuts that are more lean. Okay, so that essentially encapsulates meat. Okay, meat. And as you can tell, it's not a real quote-unquote sexy category, right? There's not a bunch of different choices to make. There's not a bunch of different options. It literally comes down to some chicken, some fish, and some beef. But I like it that way because, if you're somebody that's looking for a variety, you're able to create different recipes. You're able to cook these cuts of meat with different seasonings, different styles, different meals. It's very, very flexible, but essentially this is probably the most important thing, probably the most important purchase of your grocery trip. And the worst part is that it's the most basic. We have already wrapped up that category. So moving on, I think the next important category is going to be dairy. Dairy. Dairy is the second most important. I am not a believer in inflammation. I'm not a believer in all these different things that dairy is awful for us, that we're the only species that eats other people's, or other species' milk. I'm not into any of that stuff. So dairy is highly important for me. The protein content is very high quality in dairy as opposed to like vegetable protein. And it's pretty cost effective. Skim milk is something that we are buying right now, although we've also bought almond milk in our household. I guess the big difference when you're asking yourself skim milk or almond milk is what's your opinion on carbohydrate intake versus protein intake? We use skim milk a lot for our protein shakes. I love the consistency a lot better than using water. And I'd rather get the protein boost and deal with the 12 to 14 grams of carbohydrates that come in a serving of milk than to go with an almond milk selection, which is essentially a fat source because there's going to be a couple grams of fat, maybe a couple grams of carbs, and virtually no grams of protein, like 1 gram of protein per serving. So it's just one of those battles that you have to go through is, what's more important to you? Having like 90 calories with skim milk and getting 8 grams of protein and like 12 carbs, or getting almond milk, which is going to be about 45 calories, but have nothing really to it. It's just you're kind of just using it for a protein shake, just for the substance. But don't think that you're going to get protein from almond milk. And so that's the battle. I don't think it's a wrong decision. And I've used both in the past, but right now we're on the skim milk kick. Chocolate milk, something that we do purchase. We usually buy 1%, so we limit fat because there are more carbohydrates in chocolate milk, and still an adequate source of protein. Again, we're not huge chocolate milk drinkers, don't get me wrong. I probably have a serving every 3 or 4 days, something like that, but it's still nice to have. We buy the small container. Cottage cheese is next. Again, depending on where you are in your diet and your fat goals, you can buy the low-fat version or you can buy the full-fat version. I don't think it particularly matters. The thing with dairy is you try to find grass-fed full-fat versions if you can and consume that. If you're on a lower fat intake, then just buy don't buy organic, just buy good old low-fat or no-fat. I have not found grass-fed cottage cheese or an organic version of cottage cheese. For whatever reason, maybe there's a process. I'm not educated on that subject enough to really speak about it. I just know that I haven't found it very easily. So we do consume the low-fat, normal cottage cheese. And typically when we have it, I'll consume 2 servings of it, which gives me about 25 grams of protein, virtually no fat, virtually no carbohydrate. It's a good source of straight protein. Greek yogurt is next on my list. Greek yogurt, I buy plain Greek yogurt. Plain, non-fat Greek yogurt. 0 grams of fat, virtually no carbs, again, very small amount, underneath 10 grams, and then protein is in the range of, again, 25 grams of protein. Greek yogurt plain does not taste very good at all, so you look to either combine it with something like honey, which is going to add carbohydrates, or you can add a fat like peanut butter and kind of stir it in, or something that I'm a big fan of is doubling down on protein and adding in a very high quality and delicious tasting protein powder. And now you've turned something from 25 grams into 40 grams of protein very quickly, and it actually tastes good. But I do buy non-fat, 0% plain Greek yogurt. And I would much rather add flavors to it than just buy the kind of Greek yogurt where they're adding sugar and fruit and all these different things in there. And then next thing you know, you're buying one of those small little cups and you're having 12 grams of protein, which is great, but then you're having 19 carbs. So now it's more of a carbohydrate source than a protein source. So I think that is why, again, I highly recommend a non-fat, a plain, boring Greek yogurt with virtually little to no carbs. Eggs. I put eggs in the category of dairy just because that's usually where you find that in the store. I'm a big fan of organic eggs. The fat content is going to be theoretically higher quality. It's been tested that way with more CLA, better omega-3s. So we do buy whole eggs, and we buy the organic kind. Now, they're like 3 times as expensive for the dozen. So what we like to do is when we buy that dozen for about $3, I'll buy egg whites. They sell them in a little carton. And that way, whenever we're cooking eggs, I can add egg white to increase my protein intake without, because here's the deal, right? If you buy the eggs that are like $1 for a dozen, and that's fine to do, by the way, you just, you're sacrificing some of the fat, the benefits of the fat content. And again, that's fine because budgetarily that makes sense to me. 99 cents for a dozen eggs, and you can make 4 or 5 eggs at a time, scramble it up, and you're good to go. And now you have a high fat, high protein meal. I'm not going. If I only buy 1 dozen of eggs because they're $3, I don't want to sit there and crack 4 or 5 eggs at a time and only get 2 servings out of it for $3. So what I tend to do is either use 1 or 2 eggs, and I use the whole egg, and then I'll add 3 or 4 servings of egg white to it. So it's like I'm getting the protein of 5 or 6 eggs, but only the fat benefits of 2. And cost effective wise, that makes a lot more sense to me. So eggs are on the list. If I'm moving too fast for you, by all means, the beautiful thing about a podcast is that you're able to pause this and write notes or take mental adjustments of this. You're able to do that. But I wanted to get through this quickly because I'm not going to turn this into an hour podcast talking about the grocery store, right? I'm just trying to get through a quick list of what we do, and it's really that simple. Because once you start to learn these things, your trips become boring because you go into the store and you buy similar things, and you're in and out in 20, 30 minutes. All right. Next on my list is cheese. We will go in there and we will buy shredded cheese. We don't consume a lot of it, but we do like to put it on eggs every once in a while or chicken. We'll do things like that. But we buy shredded cheese. If you can find organic full fat, that's great. But just remember, you're going to have a lot less of it. If you buy a low fat version, a 2% or something to that effect, you can have a little bit more because you're going to get probably 5 grams of fat, 8 grams of protein in that ratio, whereas a full fat organic version is about 8 and 8. 8 grams of fat, 8 grams of protein. And again, the biggest things you have to consider, like we talked about in the article, in the context of this episode, is that your fat content or your carbohydrate content that you take on a daily basis can quickly scale with your calories, and then you're left with low protein, or not enough protein for the day. So we will buy shredded cheese. We do use it, but it is pretty sparingly. That wraps us up for our dairy section. Sometimes you can find like bacon in that section or something. We will buy center cut bacon, which has more protein than fat. But we don't particularly buy sliced cheese. We don't buy lunch meats. No real reason, just preference, and then bang for my buck again. Like, you can buy a thing of lunch meat, but you're really only getting like 8 ounces or 12 ounces sometimes, and it's still like $5. And I would rather just buy, a fresh chicken breast or something, or a packet of that or fish, and just create a meal around that versus buying lunch meat and making a sandwich. If we're going to move on to some fat sources, all right, we buy avocado. Avocado is a great source of fat, but be careful, there's also carbohydrates in there. That's something that I've noticed is not talked about a lot. So we mentioned you got to be careful on sources that provide fats and carbs, but not a lot of protein. Avocado actually fits that bill. You got to be careful when you have that, and as long as you're tracking into your app, that should approach and should give you that heads up, and your numbers will reflect appropriately. But we do like avocado. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do with it, which make it a highly versatile option. Olive oil is something that we cook with. Again, we don't use a whole bunch of it, and there's times where I just buy the non-stick spray. I do buy the non-stick spray, and I actually will use that quite a bit too, to just spray the pan down so that whatever meat I'm cooking, like a chicken or a fish, isn't going to stick. But then I won't add the added fats, because believe it or not, folks, when you cook with olive oil, or you put it on your asparagus, or you put it in the pan, like, your food item is going to absorb that fat, and you're going to get that calorie content. It just doesn't disappear. So I think people need to be careful about olive oil, but we do use that. Coconut oil, we don't use. I don't buy coconut oil. It's the big rage right now. It's a big buzz term. I don't use it because I'm not on the hype train. It's a saturated fat source. It's solid. It's decent, but I don't think it's like superior to olive oil. I don't think it's superior to peanut butter. I don't think it's superior to avocado. I don't think it's superior to a bunch of different things like eggs. So I just don't have enough. I already have enough fat sources that I like, that I don't need to squeeze in coconut oil. So if you're somebody that just buys it because you read on the computer that it's beneficial for you, or that it has all these medium chain triglycerides, like, don't get into the hype. It's not a heaven sent item. So we don't buy it at all. We do not buy coconut oil. Peanut butter, like I mentioned, we do buy. There's an organic version at our store that it separates. The oil does separate, and it can be a pain in the butt to use, and I fully admit that. But for me, it tends to be worth the extra fat bonus, the extra content there. But I'm all right with even something like a natural Jif. A natural Jif peanut butter is still going to have that classic Jif creamy texture to it, but it does remove some of the oil, extra sugar. It could be an option for you there, but we do like peanut butter and nuts. I would throw in that category: almonds, pistachio, walnuts. Those are our favorite there. And again, if you heard earlier too, a lot of our fat sources are combined with our protein. Like, I would rather buy a fatty cut of meat than to constantly be gnawing on nuts or peanut butter all the time. So I actually would rather keep my fat sources pretty low, and like I said, we just pretty much wrapped it up. That's about the fat sources that we use. And now we do have some butter that we get, and we do buy Kerrygold's grass-fed at Aldi's. It's pretty cheap. It's $2.88 for a block of it. And since we don't use that much of it, it lasts a good bit. So it's cost-effective for us. But I think people tend to overthink the fat category. We're going to move into the carbohydrate category. A couple ways that we're going to break this down. We're going to go fruit, vegetable, and then the rest, which would be primarily grains. Okay. Fruit. Practically any fruit's going to work for you. This is a completely preference category. You can buy organic fruit. It'll probably cost you $2 to $3 more than you would pay for non-organic. So, for instance, a bushel of apples, or I don't know if that's the right term, a bushel. I don't know. A bag of apples might cost you $3.99. A bag of organic apples might cost you $5.99. That's about what you're looking at to upgrade to organic. And again, that's a thing. It's a preference. I don't think fruits and vegetables or organic is it's not number one on my list. As I mentioned, meat is my number one category for organic materials. Number 2 would be dairy. Then number 3, fruits and vegetables. So again, I don't buy that much organic fruit and vegetables. I really don't. I'd rather spend $1 on fruits and vegetables than $3. I just would. But anything works. Apples, orange, grapes, kiwis, you name it, strawberries, blackberries. It's all good stuff. And I do buy fresh fruit. I don't buy frozen. Frozen's not bad for you. I just don't utilize it a lot. I'd rather only buy one different fruit every week, and we just kind of cycle through some different ones. I don't always buy apples. I don't buy the same fruit every time I go. We kind of just swap it out every week, and I buy enough that lasts a week. Make sense? Try to keep it simple. Vegetables. Now, we are a little more picky about vegetables. There are technically some vegetables that are better than others. For instance, corn is something that is not as high up as something that is green, leafy, or even like asparagus. So corn, we don't buy too much. It's a seasonal thing. We might buy it in the summer and grill it a little bit, but we tend not to buy a bunch of corn. Carrots can be that way. Just depends. The thing that you really have to watch out for is what people are putting in with the vegetables, especially if you're buying frozen. So if you're buying frozen, sometimes they'll put like a glaze in there or a butter sauce, or they'll put rice with it. You just got to be careful about that portion of it. I don't buy a bunch of frozen vegetables. I used to, but I don't like the taste of it compared to buying fresh vegetable. And that's just me. Now, there's way more prep time in it. I actually have to cook things, and I can't just put it in the microwave for 2 minutes and put it in one of those steam bags. But it's just my personal preference. You're completely okay to buy frozen vegetables. We tend to like asparagus. Asparagus is a big one in our household. Green beans is a big one in our household. Zucchini we will do. Snap peas. I like Brussels sprouts. My girlfriend does not, but I do like Brussels sprouts. Anything that's practically green. Peppers are fine. Onions, but the way I see peppers and onions, that's more for like cooking actual meals, like putting that in with chicken or putting that on a steak, like mushrooms and steak. I don't just make a bunch of mushrooms and just eat that on the side. I tend to do that, though, with zucchini, with green beans, asparagus, eggplant, those types of things. But again, you can feel free to rotate through vegetables. I'll buy asparagus one week, and the next week I'll buy zucchini. Then next week I'll buy green beans. Like we completely change it up, but I do like the weekly approach to it. The last category of carbohydrate is going to be everything else, which is going to primarily be our wheat section. All right, we're going to be talking whole grain pasta, breads, etc. The biggest thing that you have to take note of when you're buying whole grain breads or whole grain pasta, when you pull up the label and you go to the ingredients section, the first ingredient should read whole grain flour. Whole grain flour. If something is touting whole grain on the front of it, but on the back it says something along the lines of enriched flour, or it might say whole grain, and then it also says a different type of grain or white flour too. Like if it has multiple things, I would avoid it, and I would just get something that's 100% whole grain flour. So that goes for your breads and your pastas. That's my one tip for you on those. As long as you do that, you can buy whole grain pasta. You can buy whole grain breads, bagels, English muffins, even just good old slices of bread. Completely fine to do. But again, be careful. Carbohydrate intake could rapidly increase. Even like a serving of pasta is 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrate. And you'd be surprised what a serving of pasta is. It's a very, very small amount. So I don't tend to buy a whole bunch of this kind of stuff. And since it is boxed, it will last you a really long time. So it's an infrequent purchase, but again, can still make for a good addition to your diet. Brown rice is something that we buy, but I'm also not opposed to white rice. I think they work in similar capacities. Brown rice may keep you fuller a smidge longer, but if you can't stand the taste of brown rice, then buy white rice. Fine. Quinoa is absolutely out. Absolutely not part of my grocery list. It's just too gross. Sorry, it's gross. I think when I was going through vegetables, you didn't hear me say kale, and it's because kale tastes disgusting. If anybody tells you differently, they're lying to you. It does not taste good. All right, you have to do different things to make it. For me, quinoa, I much rather buy couscous. It's a very similar type of thing, but tastes better, and again, it's going to give you similar nutritional content. So that's the thing. But again, I don't buy a whole bunch of that. I really don't. My carbohydrate intake tends to be fruits, vegetables, and then things like if I have a protein bar because the way my lifestyle is right now is I'm always traveling. As a business owner, I'm all over the place. I'm driving. I usually can't meal prep, or I choose not to, and we'll stop at convenience stores and pick up something, and I'll buy a protein bar. You're going to get more carbohydrates in there. So I'm not making bread sandwiches. I'm not making pasta bowls. I'm not doing all that. So my carbs tend to come kind of from other sources. But again, you're free to make these purchases. And that wraps up my carbohydrate in a nutshell. Now, did we cover every single thing that I buy at a trip? No, and that's not this purpose. My purpose isn't to create the perfect list. I'm just trying to give you a snapshot that grocery shopping for a high-protein diet is relatively simple. Where the creativity comes in is what you do with these ingredients. You got to look at these things like it's an art form. You can do things with spices and seasonings and combinations of all these ingredients that we just bought today, theoretically in today's podcast. That's much more important than I'm going to take an hour and buy all these ingredients. I like to keep it simple, as everything else, and use some common sense tactics. So again, you may or may not found a ton of value in today's podcast. It's done so on purpose. I wanted to keep it simple. I'm going to give you a couple of things. If you have to re-listen to the shopping part of this list, go ahead and do it and make your grocery list off of that. But I tend to spend about $70 a week at a grocery store and buy things usually for 1 week at a time. There's a miscellaneous category that I didn't touch on. We'll hit it up real brief now. These are things like I may buy a frozen pizza, just depending. May or may not. I may or may not buy things like chips and hummus. May or may not buy cheese sticks. We buy these snap pea crisps. They're just like vegetable chips kind of things that have higher protein, lower carb, lower fat than the traditional potato chip and stuff. Pretzel, maybe some low fat popcorn or something without butter. Like these things are just hit or miss. But what I gave today was the bulk of my grocery trip. The 95% of what I do every time I go to the grocery store, I've now given you on the podcast. So now feel free to comment and ask us questions. I'd be happy to answer them and integrate that into your own grocery shopping trips. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We hope you got some value, and I look forward to talking to you all next week.